The day Elena Whitmore returned the Duke's jewel was the day she signed her own death warrant, or so the entire country believed. In the gilded halls of 1840s England, women didn't refuse men like Adrian Blackmore. They smiled. They curtsied. They disappeared into marriages that felt more like funerals. But Elena wasn't most women. And when that velvet box arrived at her modest townhouse with a diamond necklace worth more than her family's entire estate, she didn't see a gift. She saw chains wrapped in silk. What happened next would turn London society inside out, ignite a war between pride and principle, and prove that sometimes the most dangerous thing a woman can do is say one simple word: no. Stay with me until the end of this story. It's going to shake you. And if you're watching from anywhere in the world right now, drop your city in the comments. Hit that like button. You're not going to believe where this goes. The package arrived on a Tuesday morning, which Elena would later think was fitting. Tuesdays had always felt like the universe's way of apologizing for Mondays without actually offering anything better. The footman who delivered it wore livery so pristine it looked like it had never seen actual work. Deep midnight blue with silver threading that caught the weak autumn light filtering through her drawing room windows. "For Miss Elena Whitmore," he announced, his voice carrying the particular blend of formality and condescension that came with serving the truly powerful. "From His Grace, the Duke of Blackmore." Elena's mother, Margaret Whitmore, actually gasped, actually pressed one hand to her chest like a heroine in a penny novel, her other hand fluttering near her throat as if checking that her heart hadn't leapt straight through her skin. "The Duke?" Margaret's voice climbed half an octave. "Adrian Blackmore himself." The footman's expression suggested this was obvious, and perhaps they were all a bit slow for needing confirmation. He set the box, black velvet naturally, because men like Adrian Blackmore didn't do anything halfway, on the side table with the kind of reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. Elena stared at it. She didn't touch it. There was something about the box that made her skin feel tight, like it was a living thing that might bite if she got too close. "Will there be a response, miss?" the footman asked. "Not yet," Elena said quietly. The footman's eyebrows rose a fraction, probably the most emotion he'd shown in years. But he bowed and left. The moment the door closed, Margaret lunged for the box like it might evaporate. "Mother," Elena started. "Oh, hush!" Margaret's fingers trembled as she worked the small golden clasp. The lid opened with a whisper of expensive hinges, and even Elena, who had been preparing herself, felt her breath catch. The necklace was obscene, not in the way of something vulgar, but in the way of something so extravagant it stopped being jewelry and became a statement of power. Diamonds, and not the small, tasteful kind her mother wore to church. These were the size of her thumbnail, set in platinum so fine it looked like frozen starlight. The centerpiece stone was a deep blue sapphire that seemed to pulse with its own inner light, cut in a way that made it look like a piece of the night sky had been torn out and trapped in metal. There was a card tucked beneath it, heavy cream paper with handwriting so precise it looked printed. "For Miss Whitmore. A small token to express my admiration and intent. I trust you will wear it when next we meet. A.B." "Intent," Margaret breathed. She looked at Elena with eyes that had gone glassy. "Elena, do you understand what this means?" Elena understood perfectly. That was the problem. Her younger sister Caroline had wandered in from the morning room, drawn by the commotion. At 16, Caroline still had that unfinished quality of girls who hadn't quite grown into their features, all angles and enthusiasm and dreams that hadn't been beaten down yet. She peered at the necklace and whistled low. "Bloody hell," Caroline said. "Language," Margaret snapped, but without heat. She was too busy staring at the necklace like it might grant wishes. "Elena, you'll need to write a response immediately. We'll need to arrange—" "Caroline, go find Mrs. Henson. Tell her to bring Elena's blue dress, the one with the—" "I'm not keeping it," Elena said. The room went silent, not the comfortable quiet of a pause in conversation, but the shocked silence that follows something breaking. A window, a bone, a fundamental assumption about how the world works. Margaret turned slowly, still holding the necklace box. "What did you say?" "I'm not keeping it," Elena repeated. Her voice was steady, which surprised her. Inside, her heart was doing something complicated and painful, but her voice came out level. "I'm going to return it." Caroline's eyes went wide. Margaret's face did something Elena had never seen before. A rapid cycle through disbelief, anger, confusion, and then a kind of desperate panic that made her look suddenly older. "You can't be serious." "I am." "Elena." Margaret set the box down carefully, like it might explode. Her hands were shaking. "Do you have any idea at all, who Adrian Blackmore is?" "The Duke of Blackmore," Elena said. "Richest man in England. Owner of half the coal mines in the north, most of the shipping companies in Bristol, and approximately 40,000 acres across 6 counties. Unmarried, 32 years old. Known for being utterly ruthless in business and completely disinterested in society gossip." "Yes, Mother." "I'm aware." "Then you understand that this—" Margaret gestured at the necklace like it was evidence in a trial. "This is not just a gift. This is a proposal. Do you know how many women would kill for this opportunity?" "Then one of them can have it." Margaret's voice rose. "We are drowning, Elena. Do you think I enjoy watching your father drink himself into oblivion every night because he can't face another letter from his creditors? Do you think I like lying to the butcher about when we'll pay our account? Your sister needs a dowry. This house needs repairs. I know what we need, Mother." Elena stood up, and maybe it was the steel in her voice or the set of her shoulders, but Margaret actually took a step back. "I know exactly what we need, but I am not a commodity to be traded for it." "Every woman is a commodity," Margaret said flatly. "Some of us just get better prices." The words hung in the air like smoke. Caroline looked between them, her face pale. Elena picked up the box. The weight of it felt wrong in her hands, too heavy for its size, like it was made of something denser than metal and stone. "I've met the Duke exactly 3 times, Elena said quietly. "Once at the Pemberton Ball, where he asked me to dance and spent the entire waltz asking questions about Father's investments. Once at the opera, where he nodded to me from across the theater and then proceeded to ignore me for the rest of the evening. And once at Lady Ashworth's garden party, where he spoke to me for perhaps 5 minutes about the weather and my opinion on crop rotation. That is the sum total of our acquaintance." "And now he sent you a necklace worth more than most people earn in 10 lifetimes, Margaret said. "What more do you need? Love?" She said the word like it was something distasteful. "Elena, wake up. Love is what you grow after marriage, if you're lucky. What you need is security, stability, a future. In a cage. In a palace," Margaret's voice cracked. "For God's sake, child, do you think I had love when I married your father? Do you think I gave a damn? I had a roof, I had food, I had safety, and I taught myself to care for him because that's what you do. You adapt. You survive." Elena looked at her mother, really looked at her, saw the lines around her eyes that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with worry, saw the way her hands never quite stopped moving, always fidgeting with something, like staying still meant letting the anxiety catch up. Saw the gray in her hair that had appeared over the last 2 years as the money ran out and the debts piled up. And Elena felt her heart break a little, because she loved her mother, because she understood, really understood, the fear that drove these words. But understanding didn't mean surrendering. "I'm sorry," Elena said softly, "but I can't do it. I can't marry a man who thinks I come with a price tag. He's a duke. He's a stranger who sent me jewelry instead of a conversation, who thinks a necklace is a substitute for actually knowing who I am. And maybe," Elena's voice hardened, "maybe that's fine for some women. Maybe that's the smart choice, but it's not my choice." She walked out of the drawing room, still carrying the box, and climbed the stairs to her bedroom. Behind her, she heard her mother start to cry, soft, frustrated sobs that made Elena's throat tight. But she didn't stop. In her room, Elena sat at her writing desk and pulled out a sheet of paper. Her hands were shaking now, the adrenaline finally catching up with her. She had to stop twice to steady her breathing. The note she wrote was short. "Your Grace, I am returning your gift with gratitude for the thought, but I cannot accept it. I am not in the market for admiration that comes with conditions, nor intent that arrives before introduction. I wish you well in finding someone whose values align more closely with your methods. Respectfully, Elena Whitmore." She read it over 3 times, waiting to feel afraid, waiting for the practical part of her brain, the part that sounded uncomfortably like her mother, to start screaming about what she was throwing away. But all she felt was tired. and maybe a little bit free. The return package went out that afternoon. Elena paid the courier extra to deliver it directly to Blackmore House, to put it in the Duke's own hands if possible. She wanted there to be no confusion, no possibility of some servant misunderstanding and thinking this was anything other than exactly what it was, a refusal. She spent the rest of the day in her room, reading, trying not to think about the way her mother had stopped speaking to her. Caroline brought her dinner on a tray, her expression worried. "Mother says you've gone mad," Caroline said, setting the tray down. "Father says you're braver than he ever was. I don't know what I think." "That's fair," Elena said. Caroline lingered in the doorway. "What did you tell him? In the note?" "The truth, that I can't be bought." "Everyone can be bought," Caroline said. But she didn't sound certain. She sounded young and confused, and maybe a little bit hopeful. "Can't they?" Elena looked at her sister, at the girl who still believed the world might have room for her dreams, who hadn't yet learned to make herself smaller to fit into the spaces men left for women. "No," Elena said firmly. "Not everyone." Caroline nodded slowly, then she smiled, quick and a little wild. "Good," she said. "I'm glad one of us is brave enough to mean it." She left, and Elena ate her cold dinner and watched the sun set through her window, painting the London sky in shades of orange and purple and red. Like the world was on fire. Like everything was about to change. She just didn't know how much. The response came the next morning. Not a package this time. A person. Elena was in the library trying to focus on a book about agricultural reform. Absolutely thrilling stuff, really, but it beat sitting around waiting for the axe to fall. When Mrs. Henson, their ancient housekeeper, shuffled in looking like she'd seen a ghost. "Miss Elena," she whispered, as if speaking at normal volume might summon demons. "The Duke of Blackmore is here. He's in the drawing room. He wants to speak with you." The book slipped from Elena's hands. She caught it before it hit the floor, but barely. "He's here? Now?" "Been here 10 minutes. Your mother's having kittens. Your father locked himself in his study. I think he might be praying." Elena stood up. Her legs felt strange, like they might fold under her at any moment. "What does he want?" "Didn't say, just asked for you. Very polite about it, though. Said please and everything." Mrs. Henson paused. "He's taller than I expected. And he don't smile much, does he?" No, Elena thought. She didn't imagine he did. She took her time walking to the drawing room. Not because she was trying to make him wait, though that was a nice side effect, but because she needed every second to gather herself, to remember why she'd done this, to find the version of herself that had written that note and meant every word. The drawing room door was closed. Elena stood outside it for a moment, hands clenched at her sides, and then pushed it open. Adrian Blackmore stood by the window, looking out at their sad excuse for a garden. He was indeed tall, taller than she remembered, with the kind of posture that came from never having to make himself smaller for anyone. Dark hair, cut precisely, features that were too sharp to be handsome in the conventional sense, but striking enough that you couldn't look away. He wore black, because apparently subtlety was dead, and when he turned to face her, his eyes were the color of winter storms. "Miss Whitmore," he said. His voice was exactly what she'd expected. Deep, controlled, the kind of voice that never had to rise to be heard. "Thank you for seeing me." "Did I have a choice?" Elena asked. One corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "No." At least he was honest. "Your Grace," Elena said, keeping her voice level. "To what do I owe this visit?" "You returned my gift." "Yes," with a rather pointed note. I thought clarity was better than ambiguity. Now he did smile, but it wasn't warm. It was the kind of smile that made you check your pockets to make sure you still had your wallet. "Clarity, is that what you call it?" He moved away from the window, and Elena had to force herself not to step back. He wasn't threatening her, not physically, but there was something about the way he occupied space that made the room feel smaller. "Most women," Adrian said quietly, "would have accepted the necklace, written a thank you note, waited for the next move. I'm not most women." Clearly, He stopped a few feet away from her, studying her face like she was a puzzle he was trying to solve. But I confess I'm curious. What exactly did you find objectionable? The necklace itself? The price? The presumption? All of it, Elena said, but mostly the assumption. Which assumption would that be? That I could be bought without even being asked. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Adrian's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. A flicker of something that might have been surprise or anger or possibly respect. It was hard to tell. I wasn't trying to buy you, he said finally. Then what would you call it? A gesture of interest, a demonstration of intent. He tilted his head slightly. The beginning of a negotiation. I'm not a business contract, Your Grace. Everything is a negotiation, Miss Whitmore. Marriage, friendship, employment, all of it. The only question is whether both parties know they're negotiating, or if one side is pretending it's something else. Elena felt her anger spike. How romantic. I didn't claim to be romantic. I claimed to be honest. He took another step closer. Your mother tells me your family is in debt. Your father's investments have failed. You have no dowry to speak of, no prospects. And yet, you rejected the wealthiest unmarried man in England without a second thought. That's either breathtakingly stupid or remarkably brave. I'm trying to determine which. Does it matter? Yes, Adrian said simply, because if you're stupid, I'll leave. If you're brave, I'd like to make you an offer. Elena crossed her arms. I already refused your first offer. That wasn't an offer. That was a misstep. I underestimated you. I won't make that mistake again. How reassuring. He studied her for a moment longer, then walked back to the window. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, still controlled, but with something underneath it that sounded almost like frustration. I have a problem, Miss Whitmore. My mother is dying. Not quickly, but inevitably. And before she goes, she wants to see me married, settled, producing heirs to continue the family line. He said it flatly, like he was discussing stock prices. I have no interest in the social games required to court someone properly. I don't have time for balls and dinner parties and months of dancing around the obvious. I need a wife. You need financial security. It's a simple exchange. You make it sound like a transaction at the market. Isn't it? He turned to look at her. Name me one aristocratic marriage that isn't a transaction. One union in the entire country that was based purely on affection with no consideration for money, status, or family advantage. Elena opened her mouth, then closed it. He was right. She hated that he was right. Even if I accepted your logic, she said slowly, even if I agreed that all marriages are transactions, why me? You could have any woman in London, women with actual dowries, women whose families aren't drowning in debt, women who wouldn't talk back. Because those women bore me, Adrian said bluntly. I've spent the last 5 years being paraded in front of every eligible lady from here to Edinburgh. Do you know what they all have in common? They smile. They agree. They tell me exactly what they think I want to hear. It's like conversing with very expensive dolls. He paused. You, on the other hand, sent my necklace back with a note telling me I was essentially a pompous ass. That's the first interesting thing anyone has done in months. So you want to marry me because I insulted you? I want to marry you because you're honest, because you think for yourself. Because when I danced with you at the Pemberton Ball and asked about your father's investments, you didn't simper and change the subject. You told me they were poorly planned and likely to fail. You were right, incidentally. Elena remembered that conversation, remembered how shocked she'd been that he'd actually listened instead of just waiting for his turn to talk. That doesn't mean I want to marry you, she said. I know, which is why I'm making you a different offer. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. When he handed it to her, their fingers brushed, and Elena felt a jolt go through her that was deeply unwelcome. Read it, Adrian said. Take your time. I'll wait. Elena unfolded the paper. It was a contract, an actual legal contract, written in dense formal language that she had to read twice to parse. The terms were simple, if insane. 1 week. At his estate in Yorkshire. Not as his fiancée, not as a potential bride, but as a guest. An equal. She would have her own rooms, her own schedule. They would spend time together, talking, debating, getting to know each other without the performance of London society. At the end of the week, she could leave. No strings, no expectations. But if she stayed, if she chose to accept his proposal, there would be a settlement, her father's debts, paid in full, a generous dowry for Caroline. The Whitmore house, purchased and deeded back to the family, cleared of all liens, financial security for life, and in exchange, she would marry him, become his duchess, play the role required for public functions. But, and this was the part that made her read it 3 times to make sure she wasn't hallucinating, the contract also stipulated that she would maintain her own interests, her own pursuits, that she would have equal say in the running of the estates, that she would be a partner, not an ornament. It was the most romantic, unromantic thing she'd ever seen. "You wrote a contract," Elena said faintly, "for a courtship. I write contracts for everything. It eliminates confusion." "This is insane." "Probably," Adrian agreed, "but it's also honest. You'll know exactly what you're agreeing to. No surprises, no betrayals, just clear terms." Elena looked up at him. "And if I say no? If I go to Yorkshire and decide I can't stand you? Then you leave. I'll pay for your travel. I'll ensure your family receives a modest sum to help with immediate debts. Nothing extravagant, but enough to buy some time. And I'll never contact you again." "Why would you do that?" For the first time since he'd arrived, Adrian looked uncomfortable. He turned away, staring out the window again. "Because my mother asked me to be kind," he said quietly, "and because, despite what you might think, I'm not actually a complete bastard. I don't want an unwilling wife. I want—" He stopped, started again. "I want someone who chooses to be there, even if the choice is based on practicality rather than passion." Elena stood there, holding the contract, feeling like the floor had shifted under her feet. This man, this stranger who sent necklaces instead of letters, was offering her a choice, a real choice. 1 week to decide if she could live with this arrangement. 1 week to see if honesty could be enough. It was more than most women ever got. "I need time to think," Elena said. "Of course. I'll need your answer by tomorrow evening. The carriage to Yorkshire leaves Saturday morning." "That's 3 days." "Yes." "That's not much time." "No," Adrian said, "but it's honest time. Not months of pretending we're something we're not. Just 3 days to make a practical decision." He walked past her, heading for the door, and Elena felt something in her chest twist. "Your Grace," she called out. He stopped, turned. "Why did you really come here? You could have sent another letter, another package. Why face me in person?" Adrian was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she'd heard it yet. "Because you deserve the courtesy of honesty," he said, "and because I wanted to see if the woman who had the courage to refuse me was as interesting as I remembered." He paused. "You are, incidentally. More so." Then he left, and Elena stood alone in the drawing room, holding a contract that might save her family or destroy her entirely, and realized she had no idea what the hell she was going to do. Outside, she heard the Duke's carriage pull away, heard her mother's footsteps racing up the stairs, heard Caroline's voice, excited and curious, asking what had happened. And Elena looked down at the paper in her hands and thought, "This is either the bravest thing I'll ever do or the stupidest." Maybe, she thought, they're the same thing. The 3 days before Saturday felt like 3 years. Elena spent most of Thursday locked in her room, reading and rereading the contract until the words started to blur together. The legal language was dense, but the meaning was clear enough. Adrian Blackmore was offering her an escape hatch with a very expensive parachute attached. All she had to do was jump. The problem was, she'd never been good at jumping. Friday morning brought rain, the kind of cold, miserable drizzle that made London feel like it was rotting from the inside out. Elena was trying to drink her tea and pretend she wasn't aware of her mother hovering in the doorway, like a particularly anxious ghost, when Caroline burst into the breakfast room, soaking wet and grinning like she'd just stolen something. "You have to see this," Caroline said, slamming a newspaper down on the table hard enough to make the teacups rattle. Elena looked at the paper, then looked again, her stomach dropping. The headline screamed in bold type, "Duke refused. Whitmore girl returns Blackmore's gift." "Oh no," Elena breathed. Oh, yes, Caroline said, still grinning. You're famous. Well, infamous. Same thing, really. Margaret snatched the paper, her face going white as she read. This is a disaster. An absolute disaster. They're calling you. She stopped, her lips pressing into a thin line. I can't even say some of these things out loud. Elena grabbed the paper back and forced herself to read the article. It was worse than she'd imagined. The writer, some society columnist who signed herself only as Lady A, had taken the basic facts and turned them into a morality play about ungrateful women and the dangers of letting girls read too much. One must wonder, the article read, what possesses a young woman of no particular fortune or beauty to reject the advances of England's most eligible bachelor? Miss W., whose family circumstances are known to be dire, apparently fancies herself too refined for the Duke's attentions. One can only imagine the ruin that awaits such pride. No particular beauty, Caroline read over her shoulder. That's just rude. You're at least moderately attractive. Thank you, Caroline. Very helpful. They're saying you're mad, Margaret said faintly. She'd sat down without seeming to realize it, still clutching the newspaper. They're saying you've lost your mind. Mrs. Pemberton sent a note this morning withdrawing her invitation to next week's tea. The Ashworths won't receive us. We're being cut off, Elena. Cut off from everyone. Elena felt something cold settle in her chest. She'd known there would be consequences. She hadn't quite grasped how fast they would come, or how brutal. It's just gossip, she said, not quite believing it herself. Gossip ruins lives, Margaret snapped. Gossip destroys reputations. Your sister will never find a husband now. Your father will never... She stopped, pressing her hands to her face. What have you done? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Elena wanted to argue, wanted to defend herself, but the truth was she didn't have a good answer. What had she done? Refused to be bought? Stood on principle? Signed her family's death warrant? All of the above, probably. The front door knocker sounded, 3 sharp raps that made everyone jump. Mrs. Henson appeared a moment later, looking flustered. There's a woman here, she said. Says her name is Mrs. Fletcher. Says she's the Duke's housekeeper and she's here to help Miss Elena prepare for the journey. Elena blinked. I haven't said yes yet. Mrs. Henson shrugged. Well, she's brought 3 trunks and a maid, so I think she's expecting you to. Mrs. Fletcher turned out to be a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair, sharp eyes, and the kind of quiet authority that made you want to stand up straighter without quite knowing why. She swept into the drawing room like she owned it, took one look at Elena, and nodded. You'll do, she said. Bit thin, but we'll fix that. Yorkshire air and proper meals will sort you out. I haven't agreed to go, Elena said. Haven't you? Mrs. Fletcher raised an eyebrow. Then why am I here? It was a good question. Elena didn't have a good answer. Mrs. Fletcher settled into a chair without being invited and fixed Elena with a look that suggested she'd seen through better lies than whatever Elena was about to attempt. His Grace sent me to answer questions, Mrs. Fletcher said. Figured you'd have some, and he's not particularly good at explaining domestic arrangements. So, ask. Elena glanced at her mother, who was watching this exchange with the expression of someone who'd wandered into a play halfway through and couldn't figure out the plot. Caroline had perched on the arm of the sofa, looking delighted. What's Yorkshire like? Elena asked finally. Cold, Mrs. Fletcher said bluntly. Wet. Wind'll cut right through you if you're not dressed proper. The estate's about 15 miles from the nearest village, which is really just a church and a pub and some houses that are older than memory. The main house is, well, big, drafty, full of history and dead people's furniture. You make it sound charming. I make it sound honest. It's not London, if that's what you're worried about. No balls every night, no tea-time gossip, just land and sky and work that needs doing. Mrs. Fletcher paused. His Grace spends most of his time in the estate office or riding the borders. He's not much for sitting still. What about staff? Margaret asked suddenly. How many people work at the estate? Household staff? About 40. Then there's the stable hands, the groundskeepers, the tenant farmers. All told, maybe 200 people depend on the estate for their living. Mrs. Fletcher looked at Margaret. If you're wondering whether your daughter would be safe there, The answer's yes. I run a tight house. No impropriety. His Grace sleeps in the East Wing, guests in the West. There's a chaperone, Miss Hartley. She's been with the family 30 years. And she don't sleep much, so don't get ideas. Elena felt her face heat. I wasn't... Everyone gets ideas, Mrs. Fletcher said. I'm just telling you the facts. 1 week, separate rooms, proper behavior. At the end of it, you decide. That's the arrangement. And if I say no at the end, then you say no. His Grace will have a carriage ready to take you home, and that'll be the end of it. Mrs. Fletcher leaned forward slightly. But I'll tell you something, girl. I've worked for the Blackmore family for 32 years, watched His Grace grow up. He's not an easy man. Bit cold, bit too focused on duty, but he's fair. When he gives his word, he keeps it. So if he says you'll be safe, you will be. If he says you can leave, you can. Why are you telling me this? Elena asked. Mrs. Fletcher smiled, a quick, sharp thing. Because I've seen him go through enough simpering idiots who just want the title. If he thinks you're different, maybe you are. And maybe that's what this old house needs. Bit of backbone. She stood up, brushing invisible dust from her skirts. Carriage leaves tomorrow at 8. Be ready or don't. Makes no difference to me either way. Then she left, taking her trunks and her maid and her blunt honesty with her, and Elena sat in the sudden silence feeling like she'd just been run over by something very polite and very unstoppable. Well, Caroline said. She was terrifying. Yes, Elena agreed. Margaret was staring at the door Mrs. Fletcher had disappeared through. You're actually considering this, she said slowly. You're actually thinking about going. Elena didn't answer, couldn't answer, because the truth was, yes, she was thinking about it, had been thinking about it since Adrian left. And that article in the paper had somehow made it worse, made the walls of London society feel like they were closing in, made the idea of cold wind and empty Yorkshire moors feel like breathing room. If you go, Margaret said carefully, people will talk. They'll say terrible things. They'll assume. They're already assuming, Elena interrupted. They've already decided I'm either mad or calculating. Going to Yorkshire won't change that. It might make it worse. It might make it better. Elena stood up, pacing to the window. The rain was coming down harder now, turning the street into a river of gray. If I stay here, I'm ruined anyway. The Pembertons won't receive me. The Ashworths are done with us. How long before we can't show our faces anywhere? How long before Father's creditors start taking furniture because we can't pay? She turned to face her mother. At least in Yorkshire, I'd be making a choice, instead of just waiting for everything to fall apart. That's fear talking, Margaret said. Maybe, but it's also practical. Elena crossed her arms. You're the one who told me to adapt, to survive. Well, this is me surviving, just not the way you wanted. The words came out harsher than she'd intended, and she saw her mother flinch, but Margaret didn't argue, just sat there, looking old and tired and defeated, and Elena felt a wave of guilt so strong it almost knocked her over. I'm sorry, Elena said quietly. I'm not trying to hurt you. I need to see if there's another way. A way that doesn't feel like giving up. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood, walked over to Elena, and took her hands. Her grip was tight, almost desperate. If you go, Margaret said, promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you won't let him... She stopped, searching for words. Promise me you won't lose yourself trying to please him. I promise, Elena said, and promise me you'll come back if it's not right. Don't stay out of obligation. Don't stay because you think you have to save us. We'll manage, somehow. Elena squeezed her mother's hands. I promise. They stood there for a moment, holding on to each other like they were the only solid things in a world that had gone liquid and strange. Then Margaret let go, stepped back, and nodded. Then you'd better pack, she said. 8 o'clock comes early. Yeah, Saturday morning arrived with cruel punctuality. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still the color of old bruises, and the wind had teeth. Elena stood in the front hall wearing her best traveling dress, which was really her only traveling dress that didn't have visible mending, and trying not to throw up. Her trunk was already loaded on the carriage outside. Mrs. Fletcher had sent the maid ahead with instructions on what to pack, and Elena had been too overwhelmed to argue about most of it. Her father appeared from his study, looking more sober than he'd been in months. He pulled her into a hug that smelled like old books and regret. "Be smart," he whispered. "Be brave. And if he's cruel, you come home. I don't care about the debts. I care about you." Elena nodded against his shoulder, not trusting herself to speak. Caroline was crying, actually crying, tears streaming down her face, and clinging to Elena's arm. "Write to me," she demanded. "Every day. Tell me everything. I want to know if he's secretly a monster, or if Mrs. Fletcher poisons people, or if the house is haunted." "I'll write," Elena promised, "and I'll be back in a week. This isn't goodbye forever." "It feels like it," Caroline said, but she let go. Margaret stood by the door, her face carefully blank. She'd already said her piece. Now she just watched as Elena pulled on her gloves, picked up her small traveling bag, and walked toward the carriage. The Blackmore carriage was absurdly nice, all polished wood and velvet seats, and a coat of arms on the door that looked like it cost more than Elena's house. The driver was a mountain of a man with a face like weathered stone, and he handed Elena up into the carriage with surprising gentleness. Mrs. Fletcher was already inside, along with the maid, a quiet girl named Jenny who looked about 16 and scared of everything. Mrs. Fletcher gave Elena an appraising look. "You came," she said. "Apparently," Elena said. "Good. Settle in. It's a long ride." The carriage lurched forward, and Elena twisted in her seat to look back at her family standing on the steps. Her father raised a hand. Caroline was still crying. Her mother's face was stone. Then the carriage turned the corner, and they were gone. And Elena was committed. The first hour of the journey passed in silence. Elena stared out the window, watching London give way to countryside, the buildings getting smaller and farther apart until they disappeared entirely, and there was just fields and sky and the occasional lonely farmhouse. Mrs. Fletcher pulled out some knitting. Jenny fell asleep almost immediately, her head lolling against the side of the carriage. And Elena sat there, trying not to think about what she'd just done, and failing completely. "You're terrified," Mrs. Fletcher said without looking up from her knitting. "Is it that obvious? You've got that look. Like a rabbit that just realized the fox is faster." Mrs. Fletcher's needles clicked rhythmically. "Natural enough? You're traveling alone with strangers to a place you've never been to marry a man you barely know. Be weird if you weren't scared." "I haven't agreed to marry him yet," Elena said. "Haven't you?" Mrs. Fletcher glanced up, one eyebrow raised. "You got in the carriage. That's halfway there." Elena wanted to argue, but couldn't quite find the words. Because Mrs. Fletcher was right. Getting in the carriage had been a choice, maybe the only choice that mattered. "What's he really like?" Elena asked quietly. "The Duke, when there's no one around to perform for." Mrs. Fletcher was quiet for a long moment, her needles stilling. "Lonely," she said finally. "Angry sometimes, though he hides it well. Brilliant, too smart for his own good, maybe. Fair to the staff, good to the tenants, takes care of his responsibilities even when it costs him." She paused. "His father was a bastard. Cruel drunk who treated people like they were furniture. Died when Adrian was 19, and the boy spent the next decade trying to undo the damage. Paid off debts his father left. Fixed bridges that had been broken for years. Gave land back to farmers who'd been cheated." "That sounds admirable," Elena said. "It is. It's also exhausting. He don't know how to rest. Don't know how to stop working. Thinks if he slows down for a second, everything will fall apart again." Mrs. Fletcher picked up her knitting again. "His mother's dying. Did he tell you that?" "Yes. She's the only person he actually talks to. Once she's gone," Mrs. Fletcher shook her head. "He'll need someone. Not just a wife. Someone who'll actually fight with him. Tell him when he's being an idiot. Stand up to him." "Why are you telling me this?" Elena asked. "Because you asked." Mrs. Fletcher looked at her directly. "And because I think you might actually do it. Stand up to him, I mean. Most women take one look at all that power and money and just fold, turn into whatever they think he wants. But you sent his necklace back, so maybe you're different. Or maybe I'm just stubborn." Mrs. Fletcher smiled. "Same thing, often enough." They stopped for lunch at a coaching inn somewhere in the middle of nowhere. Elena stretched her legs, used the facilities, and tried to eat the bread and cheese Mrs. Fletcher had packed, but her stomach was too knotted to manage more than a few bites. Back in the carriage, the landscape started to change. The gentle rolling hills gave way to something harsher. Steeper slopes, rockier ground, patches of moorland where the grass grew thin and the wind looked like it had opinions. The sky seemed bigger here, wider, like it was trying to swallow the earth whole. It was beautiful in a brutal kind of way, and it made Elena feel very, very small. By late afternoon, they crested a hill, and Mrs. Fletcher pointed out the window. "There," she said, "Thornfield Hall." Elena looked. The house sat in a valley like a sleeping giant. It was massive, 3 stories of gray stone with more windows than she could count, and towers at each corner that looked like they were watching the world for threats. The grounds stretched out around it in carefully maintained chaos, gardens that had clearly once been formal but had gone a bit wild, a lake that reflected the darkening sky, forests pressing in from the edges like they were trying to reclaim the land. It looked like something out of a Gothic novel, the kind of place where terrible things happened in the third act. "It's," Elena started. "Intimidating?" Mrs. Fletcher offered. "Yes. Wait till you see the inside, full of portraits of dead people who all look like they're judging you." "That's comforting," Elena said faintly. The carriage rolled down the hill and up the long drive, gravel crunching under the wheels. As they got closer, Elena could see people moving around the grounds. Gardeners, stable hands, maids hanging laundry despite the wind. The estate was alive, working, a whole world unto itself. The carriage stopped in front of the main entrance, a massive door flanked by columns that looked like they could hold up the sky. Before Elena could even gather her bag, the door opened and Adrian Blackmore stepped out. He was dressed more casually than he'd been in London. No formal jacket, just shirt sleeves and a vest, and his hair was slightly windblown, like he'd been outside. He looked more human this way, less like a duke and more like a man. He walked to the carriage and opened the door himself before the driver could do it. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "welcome to Thornfield." Elena let him hand her down, trying to ignore the way her pulse jumped when their fingers touched. "Your Grace," she said, your home is excessive?" Adrian offered. "I know, my great-grandfather had delusions of grandeur and too much money. Come inside, you must be exhausted." He led her up the steps and through the massive door into an entrance hall that was somehow even more intimidating than the exterior. The ceiling soared overhead, painted with some kind of classical scene Elena didn't have time to parse. The floor was black and white marble. The walls were lined with portraits of stern-looking people in ruffs and velvet, who all seemed to be glaring at her. "The family gallery," Adrian said, following her gaze. 5 generations of Blackmores, all equally disapproving. I've considered having them turned to face the walls, but Mrs. Fletcher says it's bad luck. "It's disrespectful to the dead," Mrs. Fletcher said, appearing behind them with Jenny in tow. "And you'll do no such thing." Adrian smiled slightly, the first real smile Elena had seen from him. "See, this is what I deal with. No respect for rank whatsoever." "Someone has to keep you humble," Mrs. Fletcher said. She turned to Elena. "I'll show you to your rooms. You'll want to rest before dinner." "Actually," Adrian said, "I was hoping Miss Whitmore might join me for tea first, if she's not too tired." It wasn't really a question, but he said it like one. Elena glanced at Mrs. Fletcher, who gave the tiniest shrug. "Your choice." "Tea would be fine," Elena said. Mrs. Fletcher nodded and disappeared with Jenny, leaving Elena alone with Adrian in the vast entrance hall. The silence felt heavy, weighted with all the things neither of them were saying. "This way," Adrian said finally, and led her through a series of corridors that were too long and too quiet, their footsteps echoing off stone floors. They ended up in a library that was bigger than Elena's entire house. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, the kind of collection that represented generations of wealth and obsession. There was a fire crackling in a fireplace large enough to roast a cow, and a tea service already set up near the windows. "I spend most of my time here," Adrian said, gesturing for her to sit. "The rest of the house feels like a museum, but this feels lived in." Elena sat, looking around at the books. "Have you read all of these?" "Most of them. The ones I haven't are on my list." He poured tea with surprising competence, no servants hovering to do it for him. Milk? Sugar? Both, please. He handed her the cup and sat across from her, and for a moment they just looked at each other. Two people who'd agreed to something insane and were now stuck following through. You came, Adrian said finally. You sent a very determined housekeeper. Mrs. Fletcher is a force of nature. I'm told she once stared down a bear. I believe it. He sipped his tea. I wasn't certain you would, though. After that article in the paper. You saw that? Everyone saw it. It was brutal. He set his cup down. I'm sorry. I didn't intend for your reputation to be dragged through the mud. That's not what I wanted. What did you want? Elena asked. Adrian was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the fire. When he spoke, his voice was careful, like he was picking through words looking for the right ones. I wanted honesty, he said. I wanted to meet someone who didn't perform for me, who said what they actually thought instead of what they thought I wanted to hear. He looked at her. You did that, and it cost you. So I'm sorry. Elena didn't know what to say to that. The apology felt genuine, which was somehow more unsettling than if it had been false. This week, Adrian continued, I want to give you what I promised. Time, space, honesty. We'll talk. We'll get to know each other. And at the end of it, you'll decide if this arrangement could work. And if I decide it can't, then you go home. No hard feelings. No consequences. There are always consequences, Elena said quietly. Yes, Adrian agreed, but at least there'll be consequences of your choice, not someone else's. They sat in silence for a while, drinking tea, watching the fire, both of them aware that they'd stepped into something neither of them fully understood. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows, and somewhere in the house a clock chimed the hour. This was it, Elena thought. 1 week. 7 days to figure out if she could build a life with a stranger in a house full of ghosts, or if she'd made the biggest mistake of her life getting in that carriage. The fire crackled. Adrian refilled her tea without asking, and Elena sat there in the fading light, surrounded by books and silence and possibility, and wondered which way she was going to fall. The first 3 days passed like a fever dream, intense, disorienting, and impossible to look away from. Adrian kept his word about honesty. Every morning, they'd meet in the library after breakfast and talk. Not small talk, not the careful dance of courtship she'd seen at London parties, but real conversation. He'd ask her opinion on estate management, on tenant rights, on coal mining regulations. She'd challenge his assumptions about women's education, about poverty, about the responsibilities of power. They fought, they argued. Sometimes she wanted to throw her teacup at his head, but he listened. That was the thing that kept surprising her. When she said something he disagreed with, he didn't dismiss it. He thought about it, turned it over, came back the next day with questions or counterpoints, or occasionally an admission that she might be right. It was the strangest courtship she could have imagined. And it was working. On the 4th morning, Elena woke to shouting outside her window. She pulled on her dressing gown and looked out to see a crowd gathering near the main gates. Maybe 30 people, carrying what looked like farming tools and homemade signs. Even from the 2nd floor, she could hear anger in their voices. She dressed quickly and found Mrs. Fletcher in the hallway, her face grim. What's happening? Elena asked. Trouble, Mrs. Fletcher said shortly. His Grace's tenants, they're not happy about the new rent increases. What rent increases? Mrs. Fletcher gave her a sharp look. The ones his steward implemented last month without asking permission. Come on, if you're going to be Duchess here, might as well see what that actually means. They hurried downstairs to find Adrian already outside, standing on the front steps facing the crowd. He'd thrown a coat on over his shirt but hadn't bothered with a cravat, and his hair was disheveled like he'd run his hands through it too many times. He looked tired and angry, and very, very alone. Elena pushed through the front door and stopped beside him. He glanced at her, surprise flickering across his face. You should go inside, he said quietly. So should you, apparently, Elena said. But we're both stubborn. A man stepped forward from the crowd, older, weathered, with the kind of face that came from decades of hard work and harder winters. Your Grace, he said, and the title sounded like an insult. We need to talk about the rents. I'm aware of the situation, Thomas, Adrian said. His voice was controlled, but Elena could hear the tension underneath. My steward made those changes without consulting me. I'm having them reversed. That's what you said last time, Thomas shot back. And the time before that. But our rents keep climbing while our yields keep dropping. And when we ask for help, we get promises and papers and nothing that actually fills our children's bellies. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Elena could see women in the back holding babies, their faces hollow with worry. Could see men her father's age looking at Adrian with something that wasn't quite hate, but was getting close. I understand your frustration, Adrian started. You don't understand anything, a woman's voice cut in. She pushed forward, younger than Thomas, but with the same exhausted look. You live in your palace, drink your fancy tea, and pretend you care about us. But when winter comes and we're choosing between heat and food, where are you? London. Always London. Adrian's jaw tightened. I spend more time here than I do in London. Not enough, Thomas said flatly. Your father was a bastard, but at least he lived here. At least we could find him when we needed him. You're a ghost. Show up. Make promises. Disappear again. Elena felt Adrian tense beside her, saw his hands clench into fists. This was bad. This was very bad. The crowd was getting louder, angrier, and Adrian was doing what he always did when cornered, shutting down, going cold, retreating into that place where he was the duke, and they were subjects and never the two shall meet. She made a decision that was probably stupid. How much did the rents increase? Elena asked, her voice cutting through the noise. The crowd went quiet. Everyone turned to stare at her. Thomas's eyes narrowed. Who are you? Elena Whitmore. A guest. Answer the question. How much? Thomas looked at Adrian, who gave a small nod. 20%, Thomas said, across all tenant farms. Would have been more, but some of us threatened to leave. And what were the rents before that? £40 a year for a standard 100-acre plot. Elena did the math in her head. So now you're paying £48 for land that... What's the average yield per acre in a good year? Thomas blinked, clearly not expecting actual questions. Wheat's about 20 bushels per acre if the weather holds. Barley's a bit more. And in a bad year? Half that, sometimes less. Elena turned to Adrian. What's the current market price for wheat? About 8 shillings per bushel, Adrian said quietly. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Elena did more math. So in a good year, a 100-acre farm might gross, maybe £80 after costs? And you're charging them 60% of that in rent? That's not sustainable. That's not even sensible. You're bleeding your own tenants dry. The crowd had gone very still. Adrian was staring at her like she'd just spoken in tongues. I know the math, he said, and there was something dangerous in his voice now. I also know that maintaining this estate, paying staff, keeping the infrastructure functional, that all costs money. Money that has to come from somewhere. From London, Elena said. From your shipping companies, from your coal mines, from the dozen other income streams you have that don't involve starving the people who've lived on this land for generations. She gestured at the crowd. These aren't numbers on a ledger. They're people. And if you can't see that, then maybe your tenants are right to question whether you actually give a damn. The silence that followed was absolute. Elena could hear her own heartbeat, could feel every eye on her. She'd just publicly challenged a duke on his own property in front of his own people. It was possibly the stupidest thing she'd ever done. Adrian's face had gone completely blank. Miss Whitmore, he said, his voice so cold it could frost glass, perhaps you should return to the house. Perhaps you should listen to me, Elena shot back. Because unless you want this crowd to turn into a mob, you need to stop talking like a landlord and start talking like a human being. Thomas was staring at her. The whole crowd was staring at her. Adrian looked like he couldn't decide whether to be furious or impressed or both. You want honesty? Elena said to the crowd. Here's honesty. The Duke didn't know about the rent increases until yesterday. His steward, a man named Morrison, who apparently thinks efficiency means cruelty, made those changes on his own. The Duke's been in London dealing with his mother's illness. That's not an excuse, but it is a fact. She turned back to Adrian. And here's another fact. You can't manage an estate from 300 miles away. You can't care for people you never see. So either you commit to being here, to knowing these people's names and their struggles, or you hire someone who will. But you don't get to do neither and then act surprised when they lose faith in you. Adrian's eyes were burning now. Are you finished? No. Elena stepped forward, lowering her voice so only he could hear. You told me you wanted someone who'd fight with you, who'd tell you when you're being an idiot. Well, you're being an idiot. These people are terrified, they're angry, and they're right, so either fix it or watch everything you claim to care about fall apart. For a long, terrible moment, Adrian just looked at her. Elena couldn't read his expression, couldn't tell if she'd pushed too far, if she'd just destroyed whatever fragile thing had been building between them. Then he turned back to the crowd. Thomas, he said, and his voice had changed, still controlled but warmer, human. You're right. I haven't been here enough. I've let my responsibilities in London take precedence over my responsibilities here, and that was wrong. He paused. The rent increases are cancelled, effective immediately. Any payments made under the new rate will be refunded by the end of the week. The crowd stirred. Thomas looked suspicious. Just like that? Just like that, and Adrian took a breath. I'm dismissing Morrison. I'll be hiring a new steward, and before I do, I'd like recommendations from the tenant farmers. People you trust. People who understand what this land needs. Why should we believe you? The woman from before asked. Because Miss Whitmore will make sure I follow through, Adrian said, and there was something in his voice that might have been amusement. She seems to have appointed herself my conscience. Elena felt her face heat, but she didn't look away from the crowd. He's telling the truth, she said, and I'll make sure the refunds happen. You have my word. Thomas studied them both for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. We'll hold you to that, both of you. The crowd began to disperse, voices rising in conversation that sounded less angry and more thoughtful. Thomas lingered, looking at Elena with something that might have been respect. You've got spine, miss, he said. Don't see much of that in London ladies. I'm not a London lady, Elena said. Not really. Good, Thomas said, and walked away. Elena turned to find Adrian staring at her with an expression she absolutely could not parse. They stood there on the steps as the last of the crowd disappeared down the drive, the morning sun breaking through the clouds and turning everything gold. That was, Adrian started. Stupid? Elena offered. Presumptuous? Completely out of line. I was going to say remarkable, Adrian said quietly. You just took control of a situation that could have turned violent and made it manageable. I made you look weak in front of your tenants. No, you made me look human. He rubbed a hand over his face. I should be furious with you. But you're not? I don't know what I am. He turned to look at her fully. Who taught you to do that? To read a crowd like that? To calculate rent ratios in your head? My father. Before he started drinking, he was brilliant with numbers. He taught me estate management, investment strategy, all of it. Said women should understand money as well as men, even if society pretended we didn't. Elena paused. He was right. About most things. Until he wasn't. Adrian was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Walk with me. It wasn't a question, but it wasn't quite a command either. Elena nodded, and they walked together away from the house, across the grounds toward the lake. Neither of them spoke. The silence felt weighted, full of things that needed saying but didn't have words yet. When they reached the lake, Adrian stopped. The water was dark, reflecting the sky like a mirror. There were swans drifting near the far shore, white against the gray. My father used to beat the tenants, Adrian said suddenly. If they complained, if they were late with rent, if they so much as looked at him wrong, he'd have them whipped, publicly, said it maintained order. His voice was flat, emotionless, but his hands were shaking. I was 10 the first time I saw it happen. A farmer named John Wells couldn't pay because his wife had gotten sick and he'd spent everything on doctors. My father had him tied to a post in the village square and gave him 20 lashes while everyone watched. Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach. Adrian, I tried to stop it, ran out and begged him to stop. He backhanded me hard enough that I saw stars, then made me watch the whole thing. Adrian's jaw was tight. That night I swore I'd never be like him, never use fear to control people, never hurt someone just because I had the power to. You're not like him, Elena said quietly. Aren't I? I'm still taking their money, still living in luxury while they struggle. The method's different, but the result's the same. No, it's not. Elena moved closer, making him look at her. Your father hurt people because he enjoyed it. You're failing people because you're trying to do too much alone. Those are not the same thing. The people going hungry don't care about the distinction. Maybe not, but you can fix this. You can choose differently. Elena took a breath. That's what you told me, isn't it? That we get to choose, even when the choices are hard. Adrian looked at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he smiled. A real smile, the kind that changed his whole face. You're infuriating, he said. I know. And you're right, again. I'm usually right, Elena said. You should get used to it. He laughed, actually laughed, a sound she'd never heard from him before. It was warm and genuine and made something in her chest do a complicated flip. I'm starting to think, Adrian said quietly, that bringing you here was either the best decision I've ever made or the worst. I haven't decided which yet. Give it time, Elena said. We've got 3 more days. But they didn't. Not really. Because that afternoon a carriage arrived from London carrying a woman who would change everything. Madam. Her name was Lady Victoria Ashworth, and she was beautiful in the way that weapons are beautiful, sharp and gleaming, and designed to cut. She swept into Thornfield like she owned it, wearing a dress that probably cost more than Elena's house, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Elena was in the library when Mrs. Fletcher came to find her, her expression dark. There's a lady here to see His Grace, Mrs. Fletcher said. Lady Victoria, she's... She stopped, choosing her words carefully. She has history with the family. What kind of history? The complicated kind. His Grace is meeting with her in the drawing room now. Thought you should know. Elena followed Mrs. Fletcher to the drawing room where she could hear voices through the closed door. Adrian's low and controlled, Victoria's high and bright and cutting. Absolutely ridiculous that you'd hide away up here with some nobody when you should be in London managing your mother's care, Victoria was saying. My mother has excellent doctors, Adrian replied, his voice tight. And Miss Whitmore is not a nobody. Oh, is that what we're calling her? I've heard some other terms. Opportunist, gold digger. Social climber who got lucky. Elena felt her face flush. Mrs. Fletcher put a hand on her arm, but Elena shook it off and pushed open the door. Victoria turned, her eyes sweeping over Elena with the kind of assessment that stripped you bare. She was probably 30, with golden hair arranged in elaborate curls and eyes the color of ice. Her dress was emerald green silk that made Elena's simple day dress look like a servant's uniform. Ah, Victoria said, her smile sharp. The woman herself. How delightful. You're prettier than the papers said, though I suppose that's not saying much. Lady Victoria, Adrian said, his voice carrying a warning. Miss Whitmore is my guest. Is that what she is? Victoria's laugh was like breaking glass. How charming. Tell me, Miss Whitmore, what exactly did you do to catch the Duke's attention? It must have been something terribly clever to overcome your complete lack of dowry, breeding, or social standing. Elena felt her temper spike. I refused him, she said calmly. Apparently that's a novel experience for him. Victoria's smile faltered for just a moment. Then it came back harder. How quaint, playing hard to get, such an original strategy. It wasn't a strategy, it was honesty. You should try it sometime. Elena, Adrian said quietly. It was the first time he'd used her first name, and it sent a shock through her. Perhaps you should... Should what? Elena asked, not taking her eyes off Victoria. Leave? Hide? Let her insult me in your house without responding? Oh, I like her, Victoria said, but her eyes were cold. She's got spine. Pity it won't matter. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded newspaper. When she tossed it on the table, it landed with the finality of a death sentence. The morning edition, Victoria said. Just arrived from London. You might want to read it before you continue this little provincial romance. Adrian picked up the paper, and Elena watched his face go pale. When he looked at her, there was something in his eyes that looked like pain. What is it? Elena asked. He handed her the paper without a word. The headline made her stomach drop. Duke's mistress, Whitmore girl, shacks up at Yorkshire estate. The article was brutal. It claimed Elena had been living at Thornfield for a week as Adrian's companion, implying everything without actually stating it outright. It described her as a fortune hunter of the worst sort, who had seduced the Duke with calculated manipulation. It suggested that her refusal of the necklace had been a ploy to intrigue him, that everything she'd done had been part of an elaborate scheme. Worst of all, it quoted sources. Anonymous sources who claimed to have seen them together, heard their conversations, witnessed inappropriate behavior. Elena felt the room spin. This isn't true. We've barely... The truth doesn't matter, Victoria said sweetly. What matters is what people believe. And right now, all of London believes you're his mistress. That you're living here in sin while pretending to be virtuous. She turned to Adrian. Your mother will be devastated. The scandal alone might kill her. Adrian's face had gone completely blank. The mask was back, harder than ever. Get out, he said quietly. I'm sorry? Victoria blinked. Get out of my house, now. Adrian, I'm trying to help. You're trying to destroy her, Adrian said, and his voice was shaking now. You came here specifically to ruin her, so get out before I have you thrown out. Victoria's mask slipped, showing real anger underneath. You'll regret this, she hissed. You think you can choose some penniless nobody over your duty? Over your family? Your mother is dying and you're playing house with a girl who'll abandon you the moment someone richer comes along. Out! Adrian roared, and Victoria actually flinched. She left, her exit somehow managing to be both furious and dignified. The door slammed behind her, and the silence that followed felt like the aftermath of an explosion. Elena was still holding the newspaper, her hands shaking. This will destroy me, she said quietly. My family, my sister's chances, everything. I'll fix it, Adrian said. I'll issue a statement. You can't fix this. Elena looked at him, and she could feel tears building but refused to let them fall. She's right. The truth doesn't matter. All that matters is what people believe, and they believe I'm your mistress, that I'm... She stopped, her throat tight. I need to leave. Tomorrow. Before this gets worse. No. Adrian, this isn't a request. If I stay, the scandal will follow you forever. Your mother will die thinking you've disgraced the family. The tenants will lose respect for you. Everything you've built will... I don't care, Adrian said fiercely. He crossed to her, taking her shoulders. Do you hear me? I don't care about the scandal. I don't care what London thinks. I care about you. Elena stared at him. You barely know me. I know you defended me to an angry mob this morning. I know you challenged me when everyone else just agrees. I know you're brilliant and brave and completely infuriating. His hands tightened on her shoulders. And I know that for the first time in my entire life, I've met someone who makes me want to be better, instead of just different from my father. That's not love, Elena whispered. I don't know what it is, Adrian interrupted. Maybe it's too soon to call it love. Maybe it's just the beginning of something that could be love. But I know I'm not letting you go because some vindictive woman wants to destroy you. My mother wants me to be happy. Actually happy. Not just married, and you... He stopped, his jaw working. You make me happy, even when you're yelling at me, especially when you're yelling at me. Elena felt something crack in her chest. She wanted to believe him, wanted to stay, but the newspaper in her hands was a reminder of reality, cold, brutal, unforgiving reality. If I stay, she said carefully, it has to be on different terms. What do you mean? Elena took a breath. Marry me. Now. Today. Not a week from now. Not after we've had time to think about it. Right now. Adrian blinked. What? The only way to kill this scandal is to make it irrelevant. If we're married, I'm not your mistress. I'm your duchess. The story changes from scandal to romance. From manipulation to... She paused. To whatever this is between us. Elena, that's the only solution, she finished. Unless you have a better idea. Adrian stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he smiled. You want to get married out of spite? I want to get married to survive, Elena corrected. The spite is just a bonus. He laughed, that genuine sound again, and pulled her closer. You're absolutely insane. Is that a yes? That's a yes. He kissed her forehead, quick and gentle. There's a chapel on the estate. The vicar lives 2 miles away. I can have him here in an hour. Then do it, Elena said, before I come to my senses. They were married at sunset in a chapel that was older than memory, with Mrs. Fletcher and Thomas, the tenant farmer, as witnesses and a vicar who looked confused but willing. Elena wore the dress she'd traveled in because there wasn't time for anything else. Adrian's hands shook when he put the ring on her finger, a simple gold band that had belonged to his grandmother. The whole thing took maybe 15 minutes. No fanfare, no celebration, just words spoken in candlelight and promises made in desperation that somehow felt more real than anything Elena had ever done. When the vicar pronounced them married, Adrian kissed her, careful and cautious, like she might break, like he couldn't quite believe she was real. They walked back to the house together as the sun disappeared behind the hills, and Elena looked up at Thornfield, at this massive, intimidating house that was now somehow hers, and wondered what the hell she'd just done. Mrs. Fletcher met them at the door, took one look at their faces, and nodded. Well, she said, that's done then. I'll have the announcement sent to the papers in the morning. Wait, Elena said. We need to do something else first. She turned to Adrian. Send a message to London, to every paper that printed that article. Tell them Lady Victoria Ashworth is the one who's been feeding them lies. Tell them she fabricated sources. Tell them she tried to destroy an innocent woman out of jealousy. That will ruin her, Adrian said quietly. She tried to ruin me first, Elena said, and she would have succeeded if we hadn't moved fast enough. I'm not interested in being merciful to someone who showed me none. Adrian looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. I'll send the messages tonight. He went to his study, and Elena stood in the entrance hall surrounded by portraits of dead Blackmores, wearing a wedding ring she'd earned through pure stubborn survival, and realized she'd just declared war on London society without meaning to. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like freedom. Mrs. Fletcher appeared at her elbow. You should eat something, she said. You look ready to keel over. I just got married despite a scandal, Elena said faintly. I think I'm entitled to feel a bit unsteady. Fair enough. Come on. Kitchen's this way. Elena followed her through corridors she was starting to recognize, past rooms she'd barely glimpsed, into a massive kitchen where staff were preparing dinner. They all stopped and stared when she walked in. This is the new Duchess, Mrs. Fletcher announced. Married His Grace about 20 minutes ago. Anyone has a problem with that? Speak now or forever hold your peace. Silence. Then a young scullery maid started clapping, and the rest of the staff joined in. Hesitant at first, then warmer. Elena felt tears sting her eyes and blinked them back furiously. Thank you, she managed. Mrs. Fletcher pulled out a chair. Sit. I'll get you some soup. You need food in you before you do anything else stupid today. Elena sat, and the kitchen staff went back to work around her, and she felt something in her chest start to unknot. These people, these strangers, were accepting her, welcoming her. Maybe because they'd seen her that morning standing up to Adrian for their sake. Maybe just because Mrs. Fletcher had declared it so. Either way, it felt like coming home. Adrian found her there an hour later, sitting at the kitchen table eating bread and cheese with Mrs. Fletcher and arguing about crop rotation strategies. He stopped in the doorway, staring. What? Elena asked. Nothing, just, my mother never set foot in the kitchen, said it was beneath her station. Your mother sounds exhausting, Elena said. Adrian laughed. She is. You'll meet her soon. She's going to either love you or try to have you killed. Possibly both. He held out his hand. Come with me. There's something I want to show you. Elena took his hand and let him lead her back through the house, up the main staircase, down a hallway she hadn't explored yet. He stopped in front of a set of double doors, then pushed them open. The room beyond was enormous, easily twice the size of her bedroom in London. There was a massive 4-poster bed draped in midnight blue silk, windows that overlooked the lake, a fireplace already crackling with warmth. It was beautiful and intimidating and very obviously the Duchess's chambers. This is yours, Adrian said quietly. My rooms are through there. He pointed to a connecting door. But they're locked from your side. You can open them whenever you want. Or never. Your choice. Elena walked into the room, running her hand over the silk bedspread. Everything was so fine, so expensive, so far from anything she'd known. Are you all right? Adrian asked. I don't know, Elena admitted. I just married a man I've known for less than a week to escape a scandal that might still destroy us both. I'm now responsible for an estate I barely understand and people I just met. And in the morning, all of London is going to wake up to the news that the social climbing nobody they've been mocking is now a duchess. She turned to face him. So no, I'm not all right. I'm terrified. Adrian crossed the room to her. So am I, he said quietly. You? You're scared? Absolutely. I just married a woman who might decide tomorrow that she made a terrible mistake, who might wake up and realize she's trapped herself in a life she doesn't want. He reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I'm terrified you'll regret this. Regret me. Elena looked at him, really looked at him, saw the fear in his eyes that matched her own, saw the hope, too, fragile and new. I might, she said honestly. We both might. This is insane. Completely, Adrian agreed, but we're doing it anyway. Apparently. They stood there in the fading light, two people who'd made an impossible choice and were now stuck figuring out how to make it work. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed 9 times. I should let you rest, Adrian said, stepping back. It's been a long day. Adrian, Elena said, and he stopped. Thank you for believing me, for... She paused, searching for words. For choosing this. Whatever this is. He smiled, soft and genuine. Thank you for being brave enough to say yes. Then he left, closing the connecting door behind him, and Elena stood alone in her new bedroom wearing her wedding ring and her traveling dress and wondering how her life had turned into something that felt like a novel she'd be too embarrassed to read in public. She changed into her nightgown, climbed into the enormous bed, and lay there staring at the ceiling. Sleep felt impossible. Her mind was racing, replaying the day, the crowd, the confrontation, Victoria's poison, the hasty wedding. A knock on the connecting door made her jump. Elena? Adrian's voice muffled. Are you awake? Yes. Can I come in? Elena sat up, pulling the blankets around her. It's your house. It's your room, he corrected, but he opened the door anyway. He'd changed into a dressing gown, his hair damp like he'd washed. He looked younger this way, less like a duke and more like just a man. I can't sleep, he admitted. Keep thinking about everything that could go wrong tomorrow. Me too, Elena said. Mind if I... He gestured at the chair by the fireplace. You can sit on the bed if you want. I promise not to compromise your virtue. He laughed and sat carefully on the edge of the mattress, leaving a respectful distance between them. They sat there in the firelight, neither quite looking at the other. Did you send the messages? Elena asked. Yes, to every major paper in London. By tomorrow afternoon, Victoria's reputation will be in shreds. He paused. Does that bother you, that we're destroying her? She tried to destroy me first, Elena said, and she'd have succeeded if we'd given her more time. So no, it doesn't bother me. Does that make me cruel? It makes you pragmatic, which is probably why we work. Do we work? Elena asked quietly. Adrian turned to look at her fully. I don't know yet, but I'd like to find out. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. The touch was electric, not passionate, not desperate, just warm and solid and real. I know this isn't what you dreamed of, Adrian said. A rushed wedding, a scandal, a husband you barely know. I didn't really dream of weddings at all, Elena admitted. Seemed like a waste of time when marriage was just another transaction. Is that what this is to you? A transaction? Elena thought about it. No, she said finally. If it was just a transaction, I'd feel differently. This feels... She paused, searching for the right word. Dangerous, like jumping off a cliff and hoping there's water below. That's romantic, Adrian said dryly. I'm not a romantic person. Neither am I. He squeezed her hand. But maybe we can figure out our own version of it. Something that's honest instead of pretty. Elena felt something warm bloom in her chest. I'd like that. They sat there in comfortable silence for a while, hands linked, watching the fire burn down. Eventually, Elena felt her eyes getting heavy, the exhaustion of the day catching up with her. You should sleep, Adrian said, starting to pull away. Stay, Elena said, surprising herself. Just stay here. I don't want to be alone tonight. Adrian looked at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. Are you sure? Yes. He kicked off his slippers and climbed into the bed beside her, staying on top of the covers while she was under them. They lay there side by side, not touching except where their hands were still joined. Elena, Adrian said quietly. Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever London says or does, we face it together. All right? All right, Elena agreed. She fell asleep like that, holding the hand of a man she'd married in desperation and defiance, in a house that was now somehow hers, with a future that was terrifying and unknown and maybe, just maybe, worth fighting for. When morning came, it would bring consequences. London would react. Society would strike back. Victoria would retaliate. But for now, in the darkness before dawn, Elena let herself believe that choosing courage over safety had been the right decision, even if the world was about to prove her wrong. Dawn came with the kind of brutal clarity that made everything feel too sharp, too real. Elena woke to find Adrian gone, his side of the bed cold. For a moment, she lay there staring at the canopy overhead, wondering if yesterday had been some kind of fever dream. Then she saw the ring on her finger and knew it was real. She was a duchess now, had been for approximately 12 hours. The thought made her want to throw up. Mrs. Fletcher arrived with breakfast and a stack of newspapers that she dropped on the bed like they were evidence in a murder trial. Might as well read them now, Mrs. Fletcher said. Get it over with. Elena picked up the top paper. The headline made her stomach clench. Duke weds in secret. Blackmore marries controversial Miss Whitmore in Yorkshire Chapel. The article was actually less vicious than she'd expected. It reported the facts, the hasty marriage, the location, the witnesses, with a tone that was more confused than condemning. There were quotes from sources close to the Duke expressing shock and concern, but nothing outright cruel. Until she got to the second paper. That one had clearly gotten Victoria's version of events and ran with it. Scandal bride. Did Whitmore girl trap Duke with pregnancy claim? Oh, Elena threw the paper across the room. I've been here less than a week. The math doesn't even work. Logic isn't really their strong suit, Mrs. Fletcher said. She poured tea with steady hands. His Grace is already in his study writing responses. Been up since 4, apparently. Didn't want to wake you. Elena climbed out of bed, still wearing yesterday's wrinkled dress because she'd been too exhausted to change properly. I need to see him. You need to eat first, then dress, then see him, in that order. Mrs. Fletcher fixed her with a look that said this was not negotiable. You're a duchess now. That means you don't run around looking like you've been dragged through a hedge backward, even in your own house. Elena wanted to argue, but couldn't find the energy. She ate the breakfast mechanically, eggs and toast that tasted like sawdust, while Mrs. Fletcher laid out a proper dress. Dark blue wool, high-necked and severe, duchess clothes. How do I do this? Elena asked as Mrs. Fletcher helped her into the dress. How do I be what they expect? You don't, Mrs. Fletcher said bluntly. You be what you are, and you make them adjust. His Grace didn't marry you because you were like everyone else. He married you because you weren't. He married me because we were cornered by a scandal. He married you because he wanted to. Mrs. Fletcher buttoned the back of the dress with efficient movements. I've known that boy since he was in short pants. He don't do anything unless he wants to, scandal or not. If he didn't think you were worth it, he'd have found another way. Elena didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Just stood there while Mrs. Fletcher pinned up her hair and made her look like someone who belonged in a house like this, even though she felt like an imposter playing dress-up. She found Adrian in his study, exactly where Mrs. Fletcher had said he'd be. The room was a disaster. Papers everywhere, multiple half-written letters scattered across his desk, empty teacups forming a small civilization on the side table. Adrian himself looked like he'd been through a war. His hair was standing on end from running his hands through it. His eyes were bloodshot, and he'd rolled up his shirt sleeves like he was preparing for physical combat. "You look terrible," Elena said from the doorway. Adrian looked up, and something in his expression softened. "Good morning to you too, wife." The word sent a jolt through her. Wife. She was somebody's wife, his wife. "How bad is it?" Elena asked, gesturing at the papers. "Depends on the paper. Some are actually relatively fair. Others—" He held up one particularly vicious article. "Others are claiming you seduced me with witchcraft. Apparently you're either a fortune-hunting succubus or a naive victim I'm taking advantage of. They can't quite decide which narrative they prefer." "Succubus sounds more interesting," Elena said, moving into the room. "At least that gives me some credit for competence." Adrian laughed, short and sharp. "I've sent corrections to every major paper. Explained that the marriage was my idea, that Lady Victoria Ashworth has been spreading lies out of personal vendetta, that you're—" He stopped. "That you're remarkable and they should be thanking me for being lucky enough that you said yes." Elena felt heat creep up her neck. "You didn't actually write that." "I wrote something close to it. Might have been a bit more formal." He stood up, walking around the desk to face her. "How are you, really?" "Terrified, angry." "Confused." Elena paused. "Hungry, but I just ate, so I'm not sure what that's about." "Stress eating. I do it too." Adrian reached for her hand, hesitated, then took it anyway. "We're going to London." Elena blinked. "What?" "Today, this afternoon. We're going to London, and we're going to face this head on." His jaw was set in that way that meant he'd made a decision and wouldn't be talked out of it. "My mother wants to meet you. The season's still in full swing, which means all the people spreading rumors will be in one place. And I'm not letting them control the narrative anymore." "Adrian, going to London right now is—" "The only thing that makes sense," he interrupted. "If we hide up here, they'll say we're ashamed, that we know the marriage is illegitimate. But if we show up, walk into the lion's den together, show them we don't care what they think, then they'll tear us apart even faster," Elena finished. "Maybe. Or maybe they'll realize they're attacking a duchess, not some powerless girl from a failing family." Adrian squeezed her hand. "You have power now, Elena. The title, the name, the estate, all of it. You outrank most of the people who've been sneering at you. They can't touch you the same way anymore." Elena pulled her hand free, pacing to the window. The view overlooked the lake, gray and choppy in the morning wind. "Power doesn't mean safety. Victoria has power. Look what she did with it." "Yes, look what she did, and look what we're going to do back." Elena turned. "What do you mean?" Adrian's smile was sharp. "The letters I sent last night weren't just corrections. They were also full of very specific details about Lady Victoria's financial situation, how she's been hemorrhaging money for years, how her late husband left her with nothing but debts and a title, how she's been desperately trying to find a wealthy second husband and failing." He paused. "How she spread those lies because I rejected her advances 3 months ago at a dinner party. Is that true?" Elena asked. "Every word. I have witnesses, letters, documentation." Adrian crossed his arms. "She wanted to ruin you? Fine. But she picked the wrong fight." Elena stared at him. This was a side of Adrian she hadn't seen before. Cold, calculating, ruthless. It should have scared her. Instead, it felt like watching someone finally show their real teeth. "When do we leave?" Elena asked. Hassan. They took the train to London, which was faster than the carriage but infinitely more public. Elena sat in their private compartment wearing the dark blue dress and a hat that Mrs. Fletcher had produced from somewhere, trying to look like she belonged in first class and failing miserably. Adrian sat across from her reading papers and making notes like this was just another business trip. Every so often, he'd glance up and catch her staring, and something warm would flicker in his eyes before he went back to his work. "Stop looking at me like I'm about to bolt," Elena said finally. "I'm not." "You are. You've checked on me 6 times in the last hour." Adrian set down his papers. "Can you blame me? Yesterday you married me in a panic. Today you're on a train to London to face the people who've been destroying your reputation. Most people would bolt. I'm not most people. No, Adrian agreed softly. You're really not. They arrived at King's Cross just after 3 in the afternoon. The platform was crowded and Elena felt every eye turned toward them as they stepped off the train. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. People stared, some openly, others pretending not to while watching from the corners of their eyes. Adrian offered his arm. Elena took it, lifting her chin and walking like she owned the entire station. Let them stare, let them whisper. She was a duchess now. They could choke on their own gossip. The Blackmore townhouse was in Belgravia, because of course it was. The house was enormous, 4 stories of white stone with black iron railings and more windows than seemed structurally necessary. A butler opened the door before they'd even reached the steps, and suddenly Elena was being swept inside a marble entrance hall that made Thornfield look modest. "Your Grace," the butler said, bowing to Adrian. Then, after the briefest hesitation, "Your Grace," to Elena. It was the first time anyone had called her that. Elena felt dizzy. "Is my mother awake?" Adrian asked. "Yes, Your Grace, she's in the drawing room. She asked to see you immediately upon arrival." Adrian looked at Elena. "Ready?" "Absolutely not," Elena said. "But let's do it anyway." The drawing room was on the 2nd floor, decorated in shades of cream and gold that probably cost more than a small country. And sitting in a chair by the window, wrapped in blankets despite the warm room, was the Dowager Duchess of Blackmore. She was tiny. Illness had whittled her down to something fragile and bird-like. But her eyes were sharp as knives when they landed on Elena, assessing, measuring, judging in the space of a heartbeat. "So," the Dowager said, her voice surprisingly strong, "you're the girl who's turned my son's life upside down." Elena curtsied. Mrs. Fletcher had drilled the motion into her during the train ride. "Your Grace, I'm honored to meet you." "Are you?" The Dowager's eyes never left Elena's face. "Most people lie when they say that. You look like you'd rather be anywhere else." "I would," Elena admitted, "but I'm here anyway." The Dowager laughed, a sharp, delighted sound. "Adrian, leave us. I want to talk to your wife alone." Adrian looked between them. "Mother, out, now, before I change my mind about liking her." Adrian hesitated, then bent and kissed his mother's cheek. He squeezed Elena's hand once, quick, reassuring, and left. The door clicked shut, and Elena was alone with a dying woman who held more social power in her little finger than Elena had in her entire body. "Sit," the Dowager commanded. Elena sat. The Dowager studied her for a long moment. "My son wrote me about you. Said you were brave, honest, completely unsuitable by conventional standards, which apparently made you perfect." She paused. "He also said you challenged him, made him think, stood up to an angry mob on his behalf." "I didn't do it for him," Elena said. "I did it because they were right. The rent increases were cruel. And yet you married the man responsible for them. I married the man who reversed them the moment he understood the harm they caused." Elena met the Dowager's gaze directly. "Your son isn't perfect, but he's trying. That's more than most people with power ever bother to do." The Dowager's lips twitched. "You don't simper, I like that. Most girls who marry into this family spend the first year trying to impress me. You look like you'd rather tell me to go to hell." "Would that be inappropriate?" Elena asked. The Dowager laughed outright. "Very. Do it anyway if the mood strikes you. I'm dying. Might as well get some entertainment before I go." The casual way she said it made Elena's chest tight. "I'm sorry. About your illness." "Don't be. I've had a good run. 68 years. Most of them interesting." The Dowager shifted in her chair, wincing slightly. "What I'm sorry about is the mess you've walked into. The scandal. The gossip. Victoria Ashworth spreading poison. You know about that." "Dear girl, I know everything that happens in London society. Victoria's been trying to sink her claws into my son for months. When he rejected her, she got vicious. Women like that always do." The Dowager fixed Elena with a sharp look. "She's going to come after you hard. Tonight, probably. There's a ball at the Worthington estate. Everyone who matters will be there, and they'll all want to see the scandalous new Duchess who trapped England's most eligible bachelor. Elena's stomach dropped. Tonight? Adrian hasn't told you yet, has he? Typical. Men are useless at the important details. The dowager rang a small bell, and a maid appeared instantly. Fetch my jewelry box, the large one. The maid scurried off. The dowager turned back to Elena. You're going to that ball tonight. You're going to walk in on my son's arm wearing Blackmore jewels and a dress that costs more than most people's houses. And you're going to show every single person in that ballroom that you belong there. She paused. Then you're going to dance with my son, smile at the people who've been destroying your name, and make them choke on their own cruelty. I don't know how to do that, Elena said quietly. Yes, you do. You stood up to an angry mob and won. A ballroom full of aristocrats is the same thing, just better dressed and worse at hiding their knives. The maid returned with an ornate wooden box. The dowager opened it, revealing a collection of jewelry that made Elena's breath catch. These belonged to my mother-in-law. She was a terror, made my life hell for 10 years, but she had excellent taste in sapphires. She pulled out a necklace that was somehow even more extravagant than the one Adrian had sent Elena weeks ago. Deep blue stones set in platinum, with matching earrings and a bracelet. This is too much, Elena said. It's exactly enough. You're a duchess. Act like one. The dowager pressed the necklace into Elena's hands. Show them you're not afraid, even if you are. Elena looked down at the jewels, feeling their weight. Then she looked at the dowager, this dying woman who'd just armed her for battle. Why are you helping me? Elena asked. The dowager's expression softened. Because my son chose you, and my son has spent his entire life trying to undo his father's cruelty, trying to be better than the legacy he inherited. If he thinks you're worth fighting for, then you probably are. She paused. And because you remind me of myself at your age. Stubborn, terrified, pretending to be brave until it became real. Elena felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back furiously. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you survive tonight. The dowager waved her hand. Now go. Find Adrian. Tell him to stop hovering outside the door like an anxious mother hen and take you shopping. You need a ball gown, and you need it in 4 hours. Shopping in London with unlimited funds was surreal. The modiste took one look at Adrian and started pulling out her finest work, and Elena stood there like a doll, while women measured and pinned and draped her in silk that cost more per yard than her father used to make in a month. The dress they settled on was midnight blue, almost black in dim light, but shimmering sapphire in candlelight. It was cut lower than anything Elena had ever worn, with cap sleeves and a fitted bodice that made her feel exposed and powerful at the same time. You look beautiful, Adrian said when she emerged from the dressing room for a final fitting. Elena looked at herself in the mirror. The woman staring back looked like a stranger, elegant, composed, the kind of person who belonged at balls and estates, the kind of person who could face down a ballroom full of enemies and win. I look like I'm playing dress-up, Elena said. You look like a duchess, Adrian corrected. He came up behind her, meeting her eyes in the mirror. And tonight, you're going to walk into that ball and show them exactly who you are. Not who they think you are, who you actually are. And who is that? Adrian smiled. The woman who returned my necklace, who stood up to a mob, who married me out of spite and survival and maybe something more. His hand came to rest on her shoulder, warm through the silk. The woman who's braver than she thinks she is. Elena turned to face him. What if I fail? Then we fail together, Adrian said simply. But I don't think you will. The Worthington Ball was exactly as terrible as Elena had imagined, only worse. The estate was lit up like a small sun, carriages lined up for half a mile as London's elite arrived in their finest clothes and their worst intentions. Elena sat beside Adrian in their carriage, wearing the sapphire dress and the dowager's necklace, and trying not to throw up. We can leave, Adrian said quietly. Right now. Turn around, go back to Yorkshire, never see these people again. Elena wanted to say yes, wanted to tell the driver to turn around, wanted to run from this, wanted to hide. But hiding meant letting Victoria win, meant letting the gossips win, meant spending the rest of her life defined by other people's lies. No, Elena said. We're doing this. Adrian took her hand and kissed her knuckles, a gesture so unexpectedly tender it made her heart skip. Then let's give them a show. They walked up the steps together, and Elena felt every eye turn toward them. Conversations died. The crowd parted like water around a stone, and then they were in the ballroom proper, under chandeliers that cost more than Elena's family home, surrounded by hundreds of people who'd spent the last week destroying her reputation. The whispers started immediately. Elena caught fragments. Can't believe he actually married her. Looks common, doesn't she? Probably already with child. Adrian's hand tightened on her arm. Ignore them, he murmured. I'm trying, Elena said through clenched teeth. Then she saw Victoria across the ballroom, and everything else faded away. Victoria was wearing crimson, bold, defiant, and she was watching Elena with an expression that promised violence. Their eyes met, and Victoria's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. She crossed the ballroom toward them, and the crowd shifted to watch. This was what they'd come for. The confrontation. The spectacle. Well, Victoria said, her voice carrying in the sudden quiet. The new Duchess. How unexpected. And so quickly married. One might almost think there was a reason for the haste. One might think a lot of things, Elena said calmly. Most of them would be wrong. Really? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you manipulated your way into a title, used every trick in the book to trap a man who was too naive to see through you. The crowd was holding its breath. Elena felt Adrian tense beside her, but she squeezed his arm. Let me handle this. Lady Victoria, Elena said, loud enough for everyone to hear, I understand you're upset. You made advances toward the Duke 3 months ago. He rejected them. And rather than accept that rejection with grace, you've spent the last week spreading lies about me to try to destroy the match. That's not manipulation, that's jealousy. Victoria's face went white. How dare you? I dare because I have witnesses, Elena interrupted. Letters, documentation, everything you've said about me, every lie you've spread, we have proof it came from you. And tomorrow, that proof will be in every paper in London. The crowd erupted in whispers. Victoria looked around wildly, realizing too late that she'd walked into a trap. You're lying, Victoria hissed. I'm not, and you know it. Elena stepped forward. You tried to ruin me because I had something you wanted. Well, congratulations, you made me a duchess. You made me powerful, and now I'm going to use that power to make sure everyone knows exactly who you are. Victoria's hands were shaking. You have no proof. I have your letters to the papers. I have 3 witnesses who heard you brag about destroying me at Lady Pemberton's tea. I have documentation of your debts, your desperation, your lies. Elena's voice was cold. You wanted to play this game. Fine. But you're not going to like how it ends. Victoria looked like she'd been slapped. The crowd was staring at her now, and Elena could see the moment they turned, could see the doubt creeping into their expressions, the realization that maybe they'd backed the wrong side. You're a nobody, Victoria said, but her voice wavered. You'll always be a nobody pretending to be something you're not. Maybe, Elena said, but I'm a nobody who just beat you at your own game. What does that make you? Victoria turned and fled. Actually fled, pushing through the crowd toward the exit, and the ballroom exploded in conversation. Adrian pulled Elena close. That was remarkable, he murmured. I think I'm going to be sick, Elena said. He laughed. Later. Right now, we dance. He led her to the floor, and as the music started, Elena realized something. People were watching them differently now. Not with scorn or mockery, but with a kind of wary respect. She'd stood up to Victoria Ashworth in front of everyone and won. That meant something in this world. They danced, and Elena let herself lean into Adrian's arms, let herself believe for a moment that they might actually survive this, that choosing courage over safety might actually work. When the dance ended, an older woman approached, Lady Pemberton, who'd cut Elena off just days ago. She actually curtsied to Elena, and said, Your Grace, I owe you an apology. Lady Victoria fed us lies, and we believed them. That was wrong. Elena looked at her, at this woman who'd been so quick to judge, so eager to condemn. She could be gracious, or she could be honest. Yes, Elena said. It was. Lady Pemberton blinked, clearly expecting forgiveness. When it didn't come, she nodded slowly. I understand. I hope in time you might. I might, Elena said. Or I might not. We'll see. Lady Pemberton retreated and Adrian squeezed Elena's hand. You're enjoying this, he said. A little bit, Elena admitted. Is that petty? Extremely. I love it. They spent the rest of the evening dancing, talking to people who suddenly wanted to meet the new Duchess, accepting apologies that ranged from sincere to obviously self-serving. And through it all, Elena felt something shifting inside her. The fear was still there, but it was smaller now. Manageable. Because she'd faced the worst they could throw at her and survived. Near midnight, they escaped to a balcony for air. The night was warm, the city spread out below them in a carpet of lights. Elena leaned against the railing, finally allowing herself to breathe. We did it, she said. You did it, Adrian corrected. I just stood there looking intimidating. Elena laughed. You're good at that, at least. Adrian moved beside her, close enough that their arms brushed. When I sent you that first necklace, I thought I was being practical, efficient, making a straightforward offer to a woman I barely knew. You were being an arrogant ass, Elena said. I was, but you saw through it. Sent it back with a note that told me exactly what I needed to hear, and then you came to Yorkshire and... He paused, searching for words. You changed everything. Made me realize that power isn't about control. It's about choosing to use it for something that matters. Elena turned to look at him. In the moonlight, he looked younger, more vulnerable, less like a duke, and more like just a man trying to figure out how to be good. I think I'm falling in love with you, Adrian said quietly. I know it's too soon. I know we barely know each other, but when you stood up to Victoria tonight, when you refused to let them break you, I looked at you and thought, that's the woman I want to spend my life with. Not because you're convenient or practical, but because you're you. Elena felt her breath catch. Adrian, you don't have to say it back, he interrupted. I just wanted you to know. Whatever happens next, whatever we build together, I'm choosing this. Choosing you. Not out of duty or obligation, but because I want to. Elena reached up and pulled him down into a kiss. It was their second kiss, the first being the brief, formal thing at their wedding, and this one was different, real, full of promise and possibility, and the beginning of something that might actually last. When they pulled apart, Elena said, I think I might be falling for you, too. Which is terrifying, by the way. Absolutely terrifying, Adrian agreed. Want to do it anyway? Yes, Elena said. I really do. They stood there on the balcony, the city glittering below them, and Elena thought about how far she'd come in 2 weeks. From refusing a necklace to wearing a duchess's jewels. From nobody to somebody. From afraid to brave. It wasn't over. There would be more battles, more challenges. Victoria would retaliate. Society would test them. The tenants needed help. The estates needed reform. And there was still so much work to do. But for now, standing beside the man she'd married in desperation and defiance and maybe love, Elena let herself believe they could handle it. Together. They stayed in London for 3 more days, and Elena watched the city transform around her. The papers that had called her a fortune hunter now ran glowing profiles about the Duchess who speaks her mind. Lady Pemberton hosted a tea in her honor. Elena attended out of political necessity and spent the entire time making pointed comments about the importance of verifying sources before destroying reputations. Victoria disappeared from society entirely, reportedly retreating to her country estate to recover from illness, which everyone knew was code for hiding in shame. But the victory felt hollow when they returned to Thornfield and Elena saw the estate with new eyes. The tenant farms were still struggling. The infrastructure was crumbling. One ball and one public confrontation hadn't fixed the actual problems. It had just bought them breathing room to start. We need a plan, Elena said on their first morning back. They were in the estate office, surrounded by ledgers and maps and decades of neglect documented in fading ink. A real plan, not just canceling rent increases. We need to rebuild. Adrian looked exhausted. He'd spent the last 2 hours going through accounts with his new steward, A man named William Grant, who'd been recommended by Thomas and actually seemed to understand that tenants were people, not line items. The numbers were bad. Worse than bad. The estate's been bleeding money for years, Adrian said, rubbing his eyes. My father took out loans against the land to fund his lifestyle in London. Then he died and left me with debts I'm still paying off. The Yorkshire properties barely break even. The London holdings are profitable, but most of that income goes to servicing debt. What about the coal mines? Elena asked. You said you own mines in the north. I do. They're profitable, but... Adrian hesitated. The working conditions are terrible. Children in the mines. 12-hour shifts. Wages so low people are starving. I've been trying to implement reforms, but the managers fight me at every turn. Say I'll bankrupt the operation if I pay fair wages. Elena studied the maps spread across the desk. Show me the mine locations. Adrian pointed them out. 7 mines scattered across Northumberland and Durham, each one a black mark on the landscape and his conscience. What if we did it differently? Elena said slowly. What if we took one mine, just one, and actually reformed it completely? Fair wages, safe conditions, no child labor, prove it can be profitable. It might not be, Adrian said. We might lose money. Then we lose money on one mine instead of 7, but if it works, Elena traced her finger across the map. If we can prove that treating workers like human beings doesn't destroy profit margins, then we have a model. Something to show the other managers, something to make them look like the cruel idiots they are. Adrian was watching her with that expression he got sometimes, like he couldn't quite believe she was real. That's going to cost a fortune we don't really have. So we cut costs elsewhere. Do we need 5 carriages? Do we need 40 household staff? Do we need... Elena gestured around the massive estate office. All of this? You want to downsize Thornfield? I want to make it sustainable, and I want to stop profiting from children dying in mine shafts. Elena met his eyes. Your father built this empire on cruelty. You've spent years trying to undo that damage, but you can't do it halfway. Either we commit to actually changing things, or we're just putting a prettier face on the same system. Adrian was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled, tired but genuine. You know you're supposed to tell me to be more ruthless, not less, right? Most duchesses would be encouraging me to squeeze more profit out of the tenants. I'm not most duchesses, Elena said. No, Adrian agreed softly. You're really not. They chose a mine called Ashford Colliery, medium-sized, neither the best nor worst performer, with a manager who seemed slightly less terrible than the others. Adrian wrote to him announcing a visit, and 2 weeks later they took the train north to Durham. The mine was exactly as horrifying as Elena had imagined. The entrance was a black hole gouged into a hillside, surrounded by crude buildings where workers lived in conditions that made London slums look luxurious. The air smelled like coal dust and despair. And standing at the entrance, watching workers emerge after their shift, were children. Actual children. Some looked barely 10 years old, their faces black with soot, their eyes dull with exhaustion. Elena felt rage settle in her stomach like a stone. The mine manager, a man named Garrett, who had the kind of face that suggested he'd never smiled in his life, met them at the office. He didn't bow to Elena, didn't acknowledge her presence at all, just addressed Adrian like she was furniture. Your Grace, unexpected visit. We'd have prepared better if... I don't want preparation, Adrian said coldly. I want honesty. How many children do you employ? Garrett shifted. 43 at present, mostly hauling coal carts. Small hands are useful in the narrow tunnels. Small hands, Elena repeated, her voice flat. You mean children. Children who should be in school. Garrett finally looked at her, his expression suggesting he'd just noticed a particularly annoying insect. Begging your pardon, Your Grace, but the children want to work. Their families need the income. If we didn't employ them, they'd starve. If you paid their fathers a living wage, they wouldn't need to send their children into mines, Elena shot back. The wage is fair for the work. The wage is slavery with extra steps, Elena interrupted. She turned to Adrian. I want to see the mine. Inside. Garrett's eyes widened. That's not... Ladies don't... I'm not asking permission, Elena said. I'm telling you. Get me a lamp and whatever protective gear you have. I'm going down. Adrian looked at her. Elena, you don't have to eat. Yes, I do. If we're going to change this, I need to see it, all of it. She met his eyes. Are you coming with me? Adrian's jaw tightened. Then he nodded. Garrett, get us both equipped. Now. Bam. The descent into the mine was like descending into hell. The shaft was cramped, dark, the air thick with dust that made breathing feel like drowning. The lamp barely cut through the darkness, and every sound echoed wrong. The creak of timbers, the drip of water, the distant rumble of carts. They walked through tunnels so narrow Elena had to duck, following a young worker who couldn't have been more than 14. The boy's name was Sam, and he moved through the darkness like a ghost, completely at home in this nightmare. How long have you worked here? Elena asked him. 5 years, Your Grace, since I was 9. 9. Elena felt sick. They emerged into a larger cavern where men were working, swinging pickaxes, loading coal into carts, coughing in the dust-choked air. And pulling those carts were more children, straining under weight that should have broken their small bodies. Elena watched a girl who couldn't have been older than 12 haul a cart up a slope, her face twisted with effort. When the girl stumbled, a supervisor shouted at her to move faster, or she'd lose her pay. Stop, Elena said. The supervisor turned, surprised. Your Grace? I said stop. Everyone stop working, right now. The cavern went silent. Men lowered their pickaxes. Children stood frozen, unsure what was happening. The supervisor looked to Adrian, who nodded. Elena stepped forward, her lamp casting long shadows. My name is Elena Blackmore. I'm the new Duchess. And starting today, things are going to change here. She could see confusion in their faces, suspicion, hope warring with cynicism. No more children in the mines, Elena said clearly. Starting immediately. Anyone under 16 is dismissed with 2 weeks' pay and a recommendation for the new school we're going to build in the village. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The supervisor started to protest, but Adrian cut him off with a look. Wages are being increased, Elena continued. 30% across the board. Shifts are being reduced to 8 hours. We're implementing safety protocols, proper timber supports, ventilation systems, emergency procedures. Anyone injured on the job will receive full pay during recovery and medical care at our expense. That's not sustainable, the supervisor started. Then we'll make it sustainable, Elena snapped. We'll cut costs elsewhere, improve efficiency, find better markets, but we're not doing it on the backs of children and desperate men anymore. She looked around at the workers. You've been treated like you're disposable, like you don't matter, but you do. This mine doesn't run without you, so starting now, you're going to be paid and treated like the valuable workers you are. A man stepped forward, older, his face creased with years of this work. Begging your pardon, Your Grace, but we've heard promises before. They never last. I know, Elena said. And I don't blame you for doubting, but I'm not your previous employers. I'm not making promises. I'm giving you my word as the Duchess of this estate. And if I break that word, you have my permission to burn this entire operation to the ground. Someone in the back laughed, shocked and disbelieving. The older man studied her face, then slowly nodded. We'll hold you to that, Your Grace. Good, Elena said. You should. The reforms took 6 months to implement properly. 6 months of fighting with managers who insisted it would bankrupt them. 6 months of long nights in the estate office, Elena and Adrian working side by side to find ways to cut costs without cutting corners. 6 months of watching the London properties' profits get funneled north to fund safer mines and better wages. But it worked. The first quarter after the reforms, Ashford Colliery's productivity actually increased. Turns out workers performed better when they weren't exhausted, starving, or watching their children die in cave-ins. The accident rate dropped by 60%. The turnover rate plummeted. And word spread to the other mines, where workers started demanding the same treatment. Within a year, all 7 Blackmore mines had been reformed. It cost them nearly everything. They had to sell the London townhouse, downsize the Thornfield staff, auction off art and furniture that had been in the family for generations. But the mines were profitable, the workers were safe, and Elena could finally sleep at night without dreaming of children in the dark. The tenant farms were next. Elena threw herself into learning agricultural science, reading everything she could find about crop rotation, soil management, irrigation. She visited every farm on the estate, learned every tenant's name, understood their specific challenges. Then she implemented a revenue-sharing model. Instead of fixed rents, tenants paid a percentage of their actual yields. Good years, everyone benefited. Bad years, everyone shared the burden. The other estates thought she was insane. "You're letting tenants keep more of their own money?" one neighboring lord said at a dinner party, his tone suggesting she'd proposed dancing naked in the village square. "That's not how this works." "Then maybe it's time we change how it works," Elena replied calmly. Adrian backed her completely. Every decision, every reform, every time she pushed for something radical, he supported her. They fought sometimes, argued about implementation details or timing, but they fought as partners, both committed to the same goal, building something better than what they'd inherited. What? The dowager died in early spring, surrounded by family. She went quietly in her sleep, and her last words to Elena were, "Don't let my son turn soft. Keep him honest." "I will," Elena promised. "Good girl," the dowager said, and closed her eyes for the last time. The funeral was enormous. Half of London turned out to pay respects. Victoria Ashworth was not among them. She'd married some minor Scottish lord and moved to Edinburgh, effectively exiling herself from society. Elena felt no satisfaction in her downfall, just a kind of tired relief that the war was over. After the funeral, Elena and Adrian returned to Thornfield. The estate was entering its busy season, planting, repairs, preparations for summer. Elena had meetings scheduled with tenant representatives, agricultural consultants, and the headmaster of the new school they'd built in the village. She was exhausted. Happy, but exhausted. Adrian found her in the library one evening, surrounded by reports and ledgers, her hair falling out of its pins and ink staining her fingers. "You need to sleep," he said. "I need to finish these budget projections," Elena said without looking up. Adrian crossed the room, gently took the pen from her hand, and pulled her to her feet. "The budget will still be there tomorrow. You won't be if you keep working yourself to death." Elena leaned against him, feeling the tension in her shoulders finally start to ease. "We're making a difference," she said quietly. "Aren't we? This isn't just... This actually matters." "It matters," Adrian confirmed. He kissed the top of her head. "You matter. What you've built here, what we've built together, it's changing people's lives. The tenants have hope, the miners have futures, the children have schools." He paused. "And I have you." Elena pulled back to look at him. 2 years of marriage had changed them both. Adrian was less rigid, more open. Elena was more confident, less afraid. They'd grown into each other, learned each other's rhythms, built something that felt solid and real. "I love you," Elena said. She said it easily now, the words no longer terrifying. "I know I don't say it enough. I get caught up in work and forget to—" "I know," Adrian interrupted gently. "I love you too. Even when you're covered in ink and arguing with me about crop rotation at midnight." Elena laughed. "Especially then, I hope." "Especially then," he agreed. They stood there in the library, holding each other, and Elena thought about how far they'd come. From that first terrible necklace to this, a partnership built on honesty and shared purpose and love that had snuck up on them when they weren't looking. 5 years after their wedding, Elena stood in the village square watching children pour out of the school she'd built. They were laughing, shouting, their faces bright with the kind of hope that only comes from believing the future might actually be better than the past. One of them was Sam, the boy from the mine who was now 17 and studying to be a teacher. He waved at her, and Elena waved back, feeling pride swell in her chest. Thomas approached, older now, but still strong. He'd become the unofficial leader of the tenant farmers, the liaison between them and the estate. "Your Grace," he said, tipping his hat, "got the yield reports from spring planting. You're going to want to see these." Elena took the folder he offered, scanning the numbers. Then she looked up, surprised. "These are excellent. Better than last year." "Better than the last 10 years, Thomas corrected. "That new irrigation system you implemented, it's working. We're on track for record harvests across all the farms. He paused. We wanted to thank you, properly. The tenants, we took a vote. We want to throw a celebration, for you and His grace, for everything you've done. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. You don't need to. We want to, Thomas said firmly. You changed our lives, Your Grace. Let us celebrate that. The celebration was held at midsummer in the meadow between Thornfield and the village. The entire community turned out, tenants, miners, merchants, servants. Someone had built a platform for dancing. There was food, music, children running wild through the grass. It felt less like a formal event and more like a family gathering. Adrian pulled Elena onto the dance floor, and they moved together to music played by village musicians who were more enthusiastic than skilled. Around them, tenants danced with their wives. Children chased each other. Old men told stories by the beer barrels. This is what power should look like, Adrian said quietly. Not fear, not control. Just people living well, being happy. It's not perfect, Elena said, ever practical. We still have problems. Debt to manage, infrastructure to repair. We're not done. We'll never be done, Adrian said. That's the point. It's not about reaching perfection. It's about choosing every day to do better than yesterday. Elena looked around at the celebration, at the community they'd helped build, the lives they'd helped change. Then she looked at her husband, this man who'd started as a stranger with a necklace and become her partner in every way that mattered. Thank you, she said. For what? For listening. That first day at the gates, when I challenged you in front of everyone, you could have thrown me out, could have ignored me. But you listened. Adrian smiled. You didn't give me much choice. I gave you a choice, Elena corrected. You just made the right one. They danced until the sun set and the stars came out, until the children fell asleep in their parents' arms and the older folks started drifting home. Then they walked back to Thornfield together, hand in hand, the house glowing warm in the darkness. In the entrance hall, Elena paused to look at the portraits of dead Blackmores that had intimidated her so much on her first day. They didn't scare her anymore. If anything, she felt sorry for them. All these people who'd built their legacy on power over others instead of power to change things. We should commission a new portrait, Adrian said, following her gaze, of us, together. Doing what? Elena asked. I don't know. Standing in a field with tenants? Reviewing mine safety protocols? Adrian grinned. Whatever it is, it should be honest. No pretending we're something we're not. Honest, Elena repeated. Yes, I like that. They climbed the stairs together, and Elena thought about the girl she'd been 3 years ago, afraid, desperate, clinging to pride because it was all she had left. That girl had made an impossible choice, had gotten in a carriage to Yorkshire not knowing if she'd survive the week. That choice had saved her, not because it led to safety or comfort or even happiness right away, but because it had led to this, a life built on her own terms, with a partner who respected her, on land that was healing under their care. In their bedroom, Adrian pulled her close. No regrets? He asked. Elena thought about it, really thought about it. The scandal, the fear, the impossible decisions, the work, the sacrifice, the endless battles to change a system that didn't want to change. No regrets, she said finally. Not one. 10 years after Elena returned the Duke's necklace, Thornfield had become something remarkable. Not just an estate, but a model. Proof that generosity could be profitable, that treating workers well led to better outcomes, that old systems could be transformed if you were brave enough to try. Other estates started adopting their methods. Labor reformers cited the Blackmore mines as evidence that change was possible. The school in the village had expanded, now teaching over 200 children. The tenant farms were thriving, the communities were stable, and the legacy of cruelty that had defined the Blackmore name for generations was finally giving way to something better. Elena stood at the library window one morning, watching Adrian ride across the estate with Thomas, inspecting the new drainage system they'd installed. She was pregnant, 6 months along, her belly finally showing despite her attempts to hide it under loose dresses. The baby kicked, hard, and she smiled, resting her hand on her stomach. Mrs. Fletcher appeared with tea. She'd aged well, still sharp-eyed and opinionated, still running Thornfield with efficient ruthlessness. "You should be resting," Mrs. Fletcher said. "I'm fine," Elena said. "You're always fine, until you're not." Mrs. Fletcher set down the tea tray. "His Grace is worried about you, says you're working too hard." "His Grace can mind his own business," Elena said, but without heat. Mrs. Fletcher smiled. "He said you'd say that. Also said to remind you that you promised to slow down in the 3rd trimester." Elena sighed. "I hate it when he's right. You should be used to it by now. He's right almost as often as you are." Elena laughed and Mrs. Fletcher's expression softened. "You've done well, girl. Better than I thought you would, honestly. You've changed this place, changed him, changed a lot of things that needed changing." "We're not done yet," Elena said. "No, but you're on the right path. That's more than most people can say." Mrs. Fletcher paused. "The portrait's finished, by the way. The artist brought it this morning. It's in the drawing room if you want to see it." Elena made her way to the drawing room where the new portrait stood on an easel. The artist had painted them outside, Adrian and Elena standing in front of Thornfield, but with the village visible in the background. They weren't wearing formal clothes or striking aristocratic poses. Instead, they looked like they'd just come from the fields, slightly windblown and absolutely real. And surrounding them in the painting were people, tenants, workers, children from the school. Not as background decoration, but as equals, as the actual point. It was the most honest thing Elena had ever seen. Adrian found her there, standing in front of the portrait with tears streaming down her face. "Do you like it?" he asked quietly. "It's perfect," Elena managed. It's us, actually us. Not who we're supposed to be, who we are." Adrian put his arm around her, careful of her belly. "You know what I think when I look at that?" "What?" "I think about a woman who returned my necklace with a note telling me I was an arrogant ass, who got in a carriage to Yorkshire because she was brave enough to take a chance, who stood up to me, fought with me, made me better than I ever thought I could be." He kissed her temple. "And I think about how lucky I am that you said yes, even though it was the most impractical, terrifying decision you could have made." Elena leaned into him. "Best decision I ever made," she said, "terrifying or not." They stood there, looking at the portrait that would hang in the entrance hall for generations, a reminder that power wasn't about control or fear, but about the choice to build something better, about courage in the face of impossible odds, about love that grew from honesty instead of performance. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, flooding the room with light, and Elena felt the baby kick again, strong and insistent, ready to enter a world that was still broken in 1,000 ways, but better than it had been. Better, because people had chosen to make it so. "Come on," Adrian said. "Let's take a walk. Show our future heir the estate they'll inherit." They walked through Thornfield's grounds, past gardens that Caroline was now managing. Her younger sister had moved to Yorkshire after getting engaged to one of the tenant farmers, much to their mother's horror and Elena's delight. Past the school where Sam was teaching history. Past farms where children played instead of working, where families had enough to eat, where hope had replaced despair. And Elena thought, this is what winning looks like. Not a title or a fortune or victory over enemies, but a community thriving, people safe, a future built on different terms than the past. They reached the top of the hill overlooking the valley, and Adrian pulled her close. "I love you," he said, "for what you've done, for who you are, for every stubborn, brilliant, infuriating decision you've ever made." "I love you too," Elena said, "even though you still sometimes make terrible suggestions and I have to correct you." Adrian laughed. "I'm counting on you correcting me for the next 50 years. "Only 50? Elena asked. "Fine, 60, 70, however long we get." They stood there on the hill, watching the sun set over an estate that was finally, slowly, becoming what it should have been all along. Not a monument to power, but a home, a community, a place where choosing courage over comfort had created something worth keeping. And when their daughter was born 3 months later, they named her Hope, because that's what they'd built, what they'd chosen, what they'd proved was possible, Even when the whole world said it wasn't. Hope that courage could win. That courage, that honesty mattered. That love, real, complicated, imperfect love, could change everything. The portrait hung in the entrance hall for generations, a reminder of the Duchess who'd started a revolution by simply refusing to be bought, and the Duke who'd been brave enough to let her change him. And every child who grew up in the shadow of Thornfield learned the story. That power meant nothing without the courage to use it right, that dignity couldn't be given or taken but only claimed, and that sometimes the most dangerous thing you could do was say one simple word. No, and mean it.